Brian, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much, and welcome to all of you out there attending today. It is always a pleasure to be able to host a webinar like this. I'm joined by my colleague, Courtney Sutton. Courtney, just to do a quick sound check, can you say hello?
Hello, everyone.
All right, we'll hear a little bit more from her later, but I just want to take this opportunity on behalf of the whole Senior Corps team to welcome all of you to this webinar on the FGP and SCP, that's Foster Grandparent Program and Senior Companion Program competition. It's an opportunity that's available right now, and I always get very excited about these opportunities because it's a great time to welcome some new folks to the National Service community, to introduce the work of the Corporation for National Community Service and Senior Corps to all of you, and then also to reaffirm and spotlight and highlight some of the fantastic work that's being done by some prior grantees all at once. So I'm sorry, not for this competition, although I'm excited for that too, for this opportunity and for this webinar and this conversation with all of you. One quick word of warning before we go too far. This is actually only our second time using this webinar platform of Zoom. It's a new tool for us here at the Corporation for National and Community Service. It's a good tool, but I'll ask for your patience if we run into any small technical difficulties. The first time we had a couple of very minor things, and if those come up again, I'll let you know. If you have any technical difficulties on your end, just let us know in that chat box, and our team will be able to. It's also how we'll be taking questions throughout the webinar here today, so please do feel free to use that chat box at any time. Couple of provisos on that. One, we may hold questions until an appropriate time to pick them up. Sometimes it's helpful to get through a body of content before we take some questions. Sometimes, if questions are too specific or require a lot of explanation, we'll direct you to send them to a mailbox that we'll bring up on the screen in just a little bit. But before we get too much farther, one thing that we want to do is get to know all of you just a little bit and see who is here with us. So let's see who in the audience has received a federal grant before. The Corporation for National Community Service, despite its name, is in fact a federal grant, and I am curious to see who has received a federal grant before. We'll give that a moment to populate. Okay, let's share the results of that. So it looks like we've got a strong body of knowledge here in terms of the federal grant management space. But of course, there are some folks who are brand new to the federal sphere too, and that is a-okay, of course. I actually think that Senior Corps and the Corporation for National and Community Service is a great opportunity to start government. Okay, we've got some more polls. Just to get a sense, you know us. How well do you know this specific program, Senior Corps? I saw somebody already mentioning in the chat box that they have a Senior Corps grant. If you don't know RSVP is one of the Senior Corps programs. But I'm curious to see who out there has a Senior Corps grant already, who's brand new to all of this, who's maybe heard of us, is familiar with us, but just hasn't worked with us before. Give that a minute to fill up. Okay, it looks like most of our attendees have had a chance to answer, so let's go ahead and share these results out. It looks like we've got a lot of current Senior Corps grantees with us here today. That's fantastic to have you here and interested in new opportunities. You are what has made the Senior Corps community so strong, but it's also really amazing to see such a wide representation of people who are new to the Senior Corps community. This is a great opportunity for you. This is a great entry into who we are and what we do. As we'll talk a little bit more about what the Corporation for National Community Service is, what Senior Corps is, and get you that background. All right, and we've got one more question. How would you describe the primary field of your organization? How would you describe the primary field of your organization? We know that many of you likely would claim more than one of these, but just go ahead and choose the one that you think best represents that, the one that best represents that, knowing again that it is probably a little bit of a simplification. Just helps us get a sense of who's here in the audience. Give it another minute or two, just 1 minute to go ahead and get your answers in. Looks like some people are still thinking it over. We know this is a little bit trickier, a little bit more nebulous. And like I said, we know that it flattens some of your organizations artificially, but it's helpful to us. All right, we've got a good cross-section of results in here, so let's go see what we've got. Mostly Asian organizations here today. That is great, but a pretty wide distribution of other kinds of organizations too. Well, no matter who you are, no matter your level of prior experience, your level of familiarity with us, you are welcome here. I hope that you will leave this webinar as excited I am as we are to share it with you. What we'll be talking about today is this competition, and in particular, whether helping you understand whether or not the foster grandparent and senior companion programs could be right for you. If you're brand new to all of this, we're only going to be able to give you a little bit of information here today, right? We've got an hour. We're going to give you a certain amount of information, and what we're also going to do is we're going to point you to where you can learn a little bit more to really assess that opportunity, to see if this is the right opportunity for you. By the end, we also want you to be able to understand how to apply for one of these grants if they are right for you, right? So we want you to be able to assess the opportunity and then take action if it is right. This is, of course, just one in a series of webinars. We'll be back here tomorrow, same time, to talk about the foster grandparent program in more depth, and then back here on Wednesday to talk about the senior companion program in more depth too. Finally, we'll wrap it all up with kind of a step-by-step guide to the application process of submitting your application in our electronic grants management system. So we're just going straight through the week, Monday through Thursday. All of these sessions are being recorded, and all of them will be posted on the same website where you got the registration information for today's webinar. That's the link over there to the top right. We call it our competition headquarters. It's going to be something that we refer to very often throughout the course of this webinar. I also mentioned our mailbox, and I want to draw your attention down to the very bottom of your screen down here, attention down there. I already mentioned that there may be times that we are not able to provide answers to some in-depth questions because we just don't have time to go deep on individual organizations quite frequently or individual situations. That is the email address you can use for any question that you don't get answered here today. Depending on how we do, we may also just get more questions than we have time for. That happens too. Of course, you can come back later days, but you can always use that email address for questions, and it is manned behind the scenes by the fabulous Courtney Sutton, who will be hearing from in just a minute. So please don't be shy about using that email address. All right. One last note before I actually hand it over to Courtney. Just to be talking about here today. Courtney's going to walk us through the basics of the competition up top here, and then I'm going to give you a little introduction to the Corporation for National Community Service, to the Corporation, sorry, for National and Community Service, and then to the two programs that are eligible for competition right now. We will wrap up by giving you a sense of what you can do next, your next steps to get an application in if you do think these opportunities are right for you. And with that, I'll hand it over to Courtney. Courtney, take it away.
Thanks, Brian. So competition is actually open right now. We are accepting applications, and you all can go into our system and begin your application or submit an application at any point between now and December 6th. For this competition, we are only looking at very specific geographic areas, and all of those that are open are listed on our Appendix A, which is on the competition website. And that Appendix A will also let you know the amount available for each location. Again, all of this information, including some additional information with our Notice of Funding Opportunity, is available on the competition website page. So just a brief overview of where we have opportunities available. The map that we are showing right now is color-coded a little bit. So the blue states are states where there are FGP or foster grandparent programs available. The orange or red colored states are states where we have senior companion programs available, and then those that are in green are some states where we have both options available in some different areas of the state. And then very quickly, this is a preview of our Appendix A document. So this document actually shows what we have available for funding and the areas that are open. So on the graph going from left to right, it shows, on the table going from left to right, it shows the states that are open, the total amount of federal funding, so the amount of funds that CNCS would provide for you to run the program, a start date based on our competition right now and the timeline, that we're hoping to fill these opportunities within. And then the volunteer service years, which we will talk a little bit more about later on in the call and then later on during the week. And then also the exact geographic locations, so the counties that are open to be served by these programs right now. So if you do not see in the area that you're interested on the areas affected, it may just not be open for competition at this point. And we will open it up for questions now if there's any questions about any of that information we just shared about competition.
You can put your questions in the chat box. We know that that is just a little taste of information about the competition, but I have lots more questions, and we'll go over them. I do want to just highlight a little bit of what Courtney just told us about, specifically relating to VSY's volunteer service years. If that's a new term to you, don't worry. We're going to define it. We're going to talk more about what that means a little bit later. And then the areas affected. I think that this is a common area chat box come in about whether more will be opened later. And, Courtney, I'll take a first crack at that, and maybe you can add to it. The way all Senior Corps competitions work is that our grants are sort of tied to a specific geographic service area, right? So usually, almost always, we're providing a certain maximum amount of money, that's what you saw in Appendix A, to serve a specific area. And these ones are the ones that are available at this time and will be open in this competition. Now, we have these competitions from time to time. Some of you may actually know that we had a competition for the third of our programs, the RSVP program, just a little bit earlier this year. It's still ongoing, but the applications, it's closed for applications now as those applications are going under review. So, and there was a whole different set of geographic service areas available then. So I can't speak to what will happen in future years, but this is the opportunity that's available right now, and these are the service areas that are available right now. Courtney, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just add, because I didn't say this when we were looking at the slide with the Appendix A, but that was just for foster grandparent. So it's possible that there are opportunities that are open in the area or the state that you're looking for, and it just wasn't necessarily in foster grandparent. So I highly recommend that everyone check the website and look at the Appendix A for both foster grandparent and senior companion, just to be sure you see what opportunities are open for both programs.
Yeah, and I also just want to clarify, that was just a screenshot to show you what that document looks like. That was not the complete document, too. So if you didn't see a state on there, in particular a state maybe that's just a little bit farther down the alphabet, doesn't mean that it's not on there, right? So this is just a screenshot. This document goes on, and there's more on there than you see right now. That is just to show you what that document looks like. So please do go ahead and check that out. If you actually already have a foster grandparent and senior companion grant, it is not on there. Those grants are re-awarded through a not competitive process. This is something that we can talk about a little bit later. But generally, when we award a foster grandparent or a senior companion program, when one budget year ends, usually we fund the first year. That's called a budget year, and we fund the first budget year. But you also award it for a 3-year performance period. So you get the right to operate the program for 3 years. You get the money for the first year with funding in subsequent years based on performance and appropriations, right? We are a federal program. We need federal appropriations to run. At the end of that 3-year performance period, you actually go through a process that we call renewal instead of competing. And you don't have to compete for that grant again. You do have to submit an application again. There is a little bit of an evaluation process there. But the general expectation is, again, that it's based on a satisfactory prior performance and not a competitive process. If you need more information about that program officer or portfolio manager, if you already have one. It's a very different process, much simpler actually in some ways. The right place to go for that information is your CNCS program officer or portfolio manager, because here we will definitely be focusing on the competition that is going on right now, because we want to make sure people are equipped for that. Okay. All right, and some of those other questions about Appendix A, I am just going to have to refer you to the actual document on the website. If it's on, that's where you need to go, right? So Scott, you're asking about the funding area with award ceilings. We don't want that to be your one source of information, right? This is going to be a theme of this webinar. Go to the website, get the primary information. That's where you need to focus on, okay? Here we're going to move on to talk about what the Corporation for National and Community Service is and our programs. Courtney, do you have anything to add before I move on?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, I know we've got many people already in the senior corps community here, but we also want to make sure that we're all working from the same basis of information. We are here, Courtney and I are here as representatives of the Corporation for National and Community Service. This is the federal agency, we are a federal agency that is responsible for supporting civic engagement and volunteerism all across the country. We partner with organizations and communities large and small across the country to give people opportunities to serve their communities and to really harness the power of service. We have two major programs and a set of smaller programs. Perhaps our best known program is the AmeriCorps program that is administered by the Corporation for National Community Service. And the AmeriCorps program engages people in service often for a dedicated period of time, usually 1 to 2 years, in an intensive way. Often they'll pick up and move to go somewhere and serve with AmeriCorps. It's open to people from all ages, although there is one program underneath the AmeriCorps umbrella called AmeriCorps NCCC that has a specific age targeting to it too. We are here today to talk mostly about Senior Corps, which is a set of programs that focuses on engaging individuals 55 and older in service. There are some sub-programs under Senior Corps, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. In addition to those two major programs, we've got a set I have encountered, including the Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service and Volunteer 11th National Day of Service and Remembrance. We're going to now focus specifically on Senior Corps and the two programs that we're here to talk about today. But if you want to know more about some of our other opportunities, you don't see an opportunity on Appendix A that's right for you, but you want to see if you can get involved, there are lots of places you can go. Nationalservice.gov is our website. I also really recommend taking a look at our state profiles, which actually details all of national service activity in a particular state. We're going through a bit of a transition period, but we have state and or regional offices depending on where you are. Either way, there's someone who's charged with representing national service to you locally. And then, of course, you can find us on social media and follow our different accounts. But like I said, we're here today to focus largely on Senior Corps, which is our set of programs that focuses on individuals 55 and older. It is the nation's largest network of older American volunteers with more than 200,000 in every state in the country, plus D.C., Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, serving in 23,000 locations. What you see on the screen is just a small sample of some of the things that network is achieving. And again, thank you to many of you who I know have been instrumental in getting us to this point and contributing to these kinds of outcomes. 50 million hours served each year, having a real concrete, valuable impact in things like elder abuse and opioid addiction, disaster recovery, and as we'll talk about, Senior Corps itself helps our volunteers stay healthy they age. We are now going to give you a little bit of a different perspective on Senior Corps. We're going to play a brief video that shows some programs. This particular video, the first one we're going to use today, takes place in New York City, actually, but just know that a little bit later on, we're going to look at one from Montana. So we've got two very different perspectives here. Hang on for 1 second while you see some changes on your screen.
Queens Veterans Court is here to help all veterans from all different branches that got charged with a crime in Queens County.
The veteran component of Veterans Treatment Court is what makes it different from all of my other treatment courts. The veteran mentor steps in and plays a very important role from the first day.
I've been an RSVP veterans mentor here in the Veterans Court for 3 years now. From the minute you meet the veteran, it's common ground. There's a bond. Did my basic in Fort.
We went to North Iraq. The mentor here are helpful because you sit and you talk to other vets that's been there with you and you guys relate, understand each other, and you see you're not the only one. It's comforting and it's helpful.
RSVP are the heart of our program. We love them so much.
FEGS Federation Employment Guidance Service. At this location, we serve individuals with developmental disabilities. Our senior companion program consists of 9 seniors who are working here at the Bronx location.
I like being a senior companion more than I like ice cream. We should teach the individuals how to be, self-sufficient on their own.
Senior companion is very rewarding. You're helping someone to pass something on to them that they can navigate, help make their lives more enriched.
Our senior companions provide one-on-one assistance, and especially these days when we need to make sure that our individuals have a good skill set and do learn to work in the community.
This is PSIS 184. Our free lunch eligibility, which is an index of the poverty line, is 97% last year.
Over a third of our children reside in temporary housing, but the foster grandparents are a constant. They are here. And that is really good for our children because it's something that they know is constant.
We can give that individual attention because the teacher has so many students that they have to concentrate on.
I love school because I'm a big kid.
Yeah.
And I love to read.
Kira is able to articulate, she's able to speak, express herself, which she was not able to do when she first came.
Our school was a low-performing school. Last year we were in the first percentile academically, and this year we're in the 53rd percentile. So we went from a failing school to a progress report of a B.
We noticed that the children who work with the foster grandparents do improve in their reading and math.
I'm incredibly confident and happy about the impact that the foster grandparents that we have right now are making.
This program is amazing. It really, really is, and we thank you guys a lot.
The Learning Center, they come here mostly to get their GEDs.
They're helping me to write the English, art, language, science, and social study, also math.
The most rewarding part about being an RSVP volunteer is to connect with new people, new lives.
It's gratifying to me when my students do well. I'm so grateful because every day I go home I feel a little bit more smarter.
It's a blessing to have them, I'm telling you. They've helped me so much. I don't think I'll stop coming until I achieve that high school diploma, I'm telling you.
I've received a couple of cards addressed to me and to the tutors. Thank you so much for all your help and encouragement in passing my GED. Dreams begin most of the time with teachers. With you all, I could move on to my next dream.
Okay, so that's just a little taste of our programs from a different perspective. That did, by the way, include all 3 of our programs. We did that intentionally because we've got an opportunity right now to apply for a foster grandparent and senior companion program grant. But our 3rd program, RSVP, which is not open for competition right now, actually will be again next year. I mentioned that we had one of those competitions a bit earlier this year. We'll actually be up for a competition again next year, so something to keep your eyes out on, or your eyes open for, I should say. Apologies here, I think I just lost my screen share. Let me get that back up. There we go. So let's just talk a little bit more about what we see of these programs. And as I've mentioned a few different times, the competition that's open right now is for the foster grandparent and senior companion program competitions. The foster grandparent program is all about a one-on-one relationship between older American volunteers and younger people with some kind of special or exceptional or particular need. Right, so you're going to see volunteers serving in places like schools, after-school programs, sometimes even places like juvenile justice facilities or homeless shelters. Wherever there's a young person who might need some kind of extra support, that's when you're going to see a foster grandparent. In addition, that program has an explicit goal of helping engage older Americans in service who are, apologies here, I'm just having some difficulties on my screen. Sorry about this. Okay, I think we're back up. Sorry about that. Like I mentioned, new tool. I appreciate your patience there. So we were just talking about the foster grandparent program. Like I said, that is all about building a supportive one-on-one relationship between young people in need and older Americans. It also has an explicit purpose of engaging older Americans in service at or near the poverty level. Anyone can be a volunteer, but older Americans who are within who are at the poverty level, can receive a small stipend in volunteering for their service. And this is to make sure they get an opportunity to serve that can often be limited in those circumstances. The Senior Companion Program is similar in a lot of ways. The biggest difference is that instead of a one-on-one supportive relationship with a young person in need, it's with an older person generally, someone who needs extra support living independently. And that's why it's got that slogan, making independence a reality, making independence a reality. So it's still built on that one-on-one relationship, but the clientele is going to look a little bit different. Senior Companion volunteers do things like help out with daily chores, they can drive people to doctor's appointments, they can provide information to older Americans to help them do things like avoid elder abuse or fraud in their homes. Right, because it is focused on that one-on-one relationship. Like the foster grandparent program, the Senior Companion Program also is specifically targeted to individuals who often don't have an opportunity to serve by offering a small stipend. The stipend right now is $2.65 an hour for those who are living within 200% of the poverty level. Just to talk a little bit about the RSVP program, that is our most flexible program. Those volunteers can do essentially anything, really whatever the community needs, an RSVP grantee can do. I like to say, if you can imagine a volunteer doing it, there's probably an RSVP volunteer out there doing it right now. That program doesn't feature, it's really more of a general program, doesn't have that specific goal of engaging older Americans with low incomes in service. It's much more broadly targeted. Like I said, that program is not up for competition right now. There was one that the applications just closed, I think about a month ago, and there will be another competition pending appropriations next year. So if you want to learn more about that, you can use some of those same resources I showed you earlier about CNCS to learn more about that. Another thing that we've already hinted at a few times, and something that we think is really special about the FGP and SCP volunteers, is we have reliable research that shows that volunteers are healthier, less depressed, and less socially isolated by participating in this program. We did a longitudinal study over multiple years, and as you can see in a second-year follow-up study, we found volunteers who participate specifically in these two programs, the FGP and the SCP programs. 88% reported fewer feelings of isolation, 84% reported stable or improving health, and 78% reported fewer symptoms of depression. So it's got this unique dual impact, right? These volunteers are serving their community, making an impact specifically on younger Americans or older Americans who need some kind of assistance, but it's also got the second level of impact on the volunteers themselves. Now, these are federal programs, and what that generally means is the funds come with a little basket of rules and regulations. This is not meant to be an in-depth description of all of the rules and regulations that accompany these. More specifically, this is meant to just indicate some of the things that you're going to need to familiarize yourself with if you are interested in applying for these programs. So I'm going to go over these briefly, but I really do need to stress that these are not meant to be all-inclusive, right? These are not meant to be all-inclusive. If you want to learn more about some of these, come back to our webinars later this week when we'll talk about them in more depth. In those webinars, sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. In those webinars, we'll also point you to some specific resources where you can learn more about these. In general, you're going to get the information you need on that competition website, but we'll also signpost you to some specific things as we go. So to just go through these very briefly, and again, this is not meant to be all-inclusive. This is not meant to be everything you need to know. It's just to demonstrate the kinds of things that you should be looking for and the kinds of things that you should be paying attention to as you put together your application. Right? Each program has a specific kind of assignment in mind, and those are one-on-one supportive relationships. As an example of what that means, it means a foster grandparent should be working with 1, 2, 3 specific children in need of some kind of special support, generally not doing broad-based teacher's aid type activity, you know, cleaning up a classroom, that kind of thing, is generally not what a foster grandparent volunteer is going to be doing, just as an example. All volunteers need to go through a specific kind of criminal history. There's more information about that in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. It's important in the process, if only so that you can include it in your budget. There are minimum and maximum amounts of service, weekly or hourly. Right? It's actually a recent change that's been introduced to the program, but there are those limits. All grantees must measure their performance according to a certain set of performance measures that you can actually find in Appendix B to the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And again, if you want to learn more about that, we'll talk more about it in the later 2 webinars this week. Because these programs do come with the stipend for volunteers, you've got to manage those stipend expenditures carefully over the course of the year. And you have to provide a certain amount of pre-service orientation and training. Finally, and this is something that I know will sound familiar to those of you who mentioned that you already have worked with federal grants, you must use the funds in a way that is reasonable, allowable, allocable, and necessary, specifically according to what is often called the uniform guidance. That is the federal government's general guidance on how to use grant funds. So again, this is not all-inclusive. This is not all the homework you need to do, but this is just a general reminder that says, before you apply for these programs, you just want to read through all these rules and regulations and make sure that it makes sense for you and that it aligns with your vision. We think they have a tremendous power to affect communities, but we also want to make sure people go into eyes wide open and make sure that it meets your vision. If you want more information, here are some sources where you can deeper into these programs. The video that I just showed you and that we'll actually be going back to, that comes from a site full of what we call impact videos. Those show our work from multiple perspectives. That one included all 3 programs. The one I'll show you at the end also includes all 3 programs, but you can find some there that focus, for example, just on the foster grandparent program. We also have a really great website full of actual vignettes of volunteer experiences called Senior Corps Stories. I already mentioned national service in your state. This is a really great resource if you want to know what's going on locally. If you follow the instructions that you see on the screen there right now, you can actually find a list of all national service programs in your state by county. So if you don't see, this is another great opportunity, if you don't see your specific geographic service area in that list, but you want to get involved somehow, well, go and look at our national service by state resources, because there might be a Senior Corps program in your community right now that you can partner with or otherwise engage with. If you want to know more about some of those rules and regulations I just talked about, the Managed Senior Corps Grant site is your best bet for that, right? That's down here. This is actually where we have all of our public day-to-day resources for our current grantees. We particularly recommend looking at the Senior Corps handbooks that you can find on that page. So this is how we tell our grantees right now, people who already have Senior Corps grants, how to manage those different requirements. So if you want to learn more about anything you come across in reading this information, that's a great resource. Themselves are in what's called ecfr.gov. CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations. That'll probably, again, be a familiar resource to those of you who have already worked with federal grants in some framework. That is the government's official rule book, essentially, and each one of our programs has a specific chapter within it. 45 CFR 2551 for the Senior Companion Program, and 45 CFR 2552 for the Foster Grandparent Program. All right, that's a fair amount of information, so let's go ahead and pull up a quick poll just to see what people are thinking. Hang on one second as I pull this up. Okay. So based on everything that we've talked about so far, what are people thinking about applying for? All right. I still see some numbers changing here. Unfortunately, unless there's some featured technology I'm not aware of. I have to wait for all the answers to come in before I can share them, but I think I'm ready to go ahead and share it. All right. So it looks like there's just a slight edge for the foster grandparent program. That makes sense, the opportunities in that program right now, but there's also lots of interest in the senior community, and a healthy chunk of people, about 14% of our attendees, who are interested in both. That is fantastic. Okay, now's another time for questions. And I'm going to actually start with one question. Oh, sorry, there we go. I've forgotten to share the results. Here we go. Let me share those results out so y'all can see what we were seeing. All right, we'll leave that up there while I actually go back into the question. So I want to jump back to a question from Jay Sullivan. He asked earlier, the program we are applying for is a program that is currently with a sponsor that has an NGA effective through June 30th, 2020 and has relinquished. Can there be a 3-month overlap? Jay, this probably won't be entirely satisfying, but that is a great example of a question that we need to direct you to the mailbox. The reason why is because there's a lot of terms in there like NGA, like relinquishment, that just we won't be able to work through with everyone on the line here today. So that mailbox is 2020. I'm going to put it in the chat box here for everybody to see. FGP SCP at cns.gov. Okay. What other questions do we have? That was an older question, but we can take some new questions, in particular maybe about these specific programs and how they work, the responsibilities that come with them, the kinds of volunteer engagements you might see. If you have a question, please just go ahead and drop it in the chat box. All lines are on mute, so the chat box is how we will be taking questions. Okay, Mary asks, what is the VSY and how is it calculated? That is actually the next topic we have, so why don't I just go ahead and jump right into that if that's where people's minds are. So now let's talk about how you can actually go ahead and get started with your application. We're going to go through a little checklist about what to do, and the first thing to do is find your opportunity in Appendix A. So we already looked at an example of Appendix A, right? That was just a screenshot. Again, that was just the foster grandparent program. Appendix A. That's available, as well as the start date, as well as this thing called VSYs in the geographic service area. So let's talk about what is a VSY, or volunteer service year, right? VSY stands for volunteer service year. All a volunteer service year is a way to count hours. It's a way to count volunteer hours, particularly stipend volunteer hours. So one VSY equals 1,044 stipended hours. You know, just think of it like, what's a good unit of measure, right? There are 16 ounces in a pound. There are 1,044 hours in a VSY. It's just like that. It's a unit of stipended hours. Where that number comes from, in case you're curious, is it's an estimate of what a 20 hours per week volunteer would serve across an entire year, 52.2 weeks. That's the calculation, right? So it's just 1,044 hours. That's all it is. So using that, 10 VSYs equals how many hours? Who can do that math? 10 VSYs equals how many hours? Just let me know in the chat if anybody can do that math for us. Okay, it's 10,440 hours, right? Just add a 0 to it, right? The math is pretty easy when you're working with 10 there. Let's do some other examples here. And actually, I'm going to just drop back out of my presentation for just a second here while I try to pull something up. There we go. Okay. Glad to see that many of us got to that correct answer. Let's do just another couple of examples here. So we're now in Appendix A. And I want to do the first couple, right? So if you look at that first California opportunity, it says 13 VSYs. 13 VSYs is how many hours? 13 VSYs is how many hours? 13 VSYs is how many hours? All right, there we go. We've got some people doing the math. Let's see if that's what we have here. There we go. And we can do the same math again. Now, one thing I want to point out is actually if you're really on top of the game and maybe really good with a calculator, all of these things are scaled the same. So I'd like to ask somebody in the chat box to go ahead and divide the next opportunity that we see here, this Idaho opportunity, divide that number by 6,000. Go ahead and divide that number by 6,000. And tell me what you get, right? Please divide it by 6. Let me scratch that out. 6,000, and tell me what you get. $35.8, right? So some people are coming 35.8, which rounds up to 36. As it turns out, if you divide all of these total funding amounts by 6,000, you will get that volunteer service year number. That's where they come from. It is $6,000 per volunteer service year. Now, a couple of things to highlight about this. This funding amount is a maximum, right? So that is a maximum amount of funding that is available. You can technically request less. And this volunteer service year number is a minimum amount. So you can actually have more service than what is required there, but that is the minimum amount of service. I saw a question in the chat. These are measuring specifically stipended hours. These are measuring specifically stipended hours. And that's because a VSY is really tied to a stipend. That's basically the amount of stipends you will get. And you can even figure out the exact dollar value of that by multiplying those number of hours by the current stipend amount, which is $2.65 an hour right now. So that's what a VSY is. And when you're looking at Appendix A, that's what you need to be sort of balancing in your mind. The maximum funding available with the minimum amount of service. And this is because as a federal program, our constituents out there in the world, you, me, as federal taxpayers, we have a certain expectation of value for money, right? A certain expectation of an impact that these grants are generating. And that's how we baseline that, with that $6,000 per VSY threshold. So that's what a VSY is. So your first step in this competition is to, let me go ahead and clear my scribbles off the screen here. Your first step in the competition is to go ahead and just make sure you find an opportunity in Appendix A and that you understand all of what's in there, all of what's in there. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Apologies, I need to just clean out these annotations for 1 second. There we go. All right, so we already talked a lot about Appendix A and our VSYs. What comes next? Next, you're going to want to review the Notice of Funding Opportunity in depth, and I like to say pay particular attention to the evaluation. Often ask me, well, what is CNCS looking for in this competition? What makes a good application? And that is the best answer. That is what makes a good application. The evaluation criteria. These are the very same things that CNCS will use to evaluate your application. So that is what you should be using. That's not all you should pay attention to in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. That is an incredibly important document, right? That is our equivalent of what in many other contexts might be known as a request for applications or request for proposals. So study that document in depth. But then when you start to craft your application, the evaluation criteria is going to be very, very important for you and try to determine how to make a competitive application. When you're actually putting that application together, we recommend using a word processing program like Microsoft Word or Google Docs or WordPerfect. Your applications have to be submitted in something called eGrants. Again, you can find more information about this in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. It's a piece of software, right? It's an online tool. And it's a little bit clunky for drafting. It's not meant for drafting. It's meant for organizing and submitting, which means you're going to want to do your drafting in this word processing document, right? That's where you're really going to work on things. And by the way, that includes your performance measures. As you'll see when you start to look at the application, we request performance measurement information in something called a work plan. We're going to talk about that more tomorrow and the next day. It's kind of like a table. For those of you who are familiar with the logical framework, it's really based on that model. And we've got a word partition page that you can use to do that in, again, a word processing program. So you don't have to do that in the piece of software, eGrants. You do need to create an account for eGrants, so make sure you do that if you haven't already. By the way, your authorized representative, right, somebody who is legally authorized to bind your organization in a contractual arrangement, very often it's going to be an executive director or someone at that level, will need to actually certify that application. Instructions on how to do this are available on the competition page. There's also a couple of administrative steps you need to take. Register in SAM and request a DUNS number. Administrative steps, but I really like to highlight them because they are easy to miss until the end of the process, and you don't want to do that. Again, you can find more information about them in the Notice Funding Opportunity. Free, not terribly labor intensive, but very important and not something you only want to be thinking about on Thursday, December 5th. And that brings us to our last recommendation about what to do, which is don't be planning to do anything on Thursday, December 5th, right? Plan to submit your application early. Plan to submit your application early. I recommend 10 business days. If that's not realistic, just do what you can do. You do not want to be sitting on eGrants on Friday, December 6th, 2019. There is a hotline you can use to request help if you run into any technical glitches, but you're going to need to do things like check the word count. Right? You're going to need to do things like fill out your budget, fill out your performance measures. All of that can take some time, and so you want to be ahead of the game and ready to submit your application early. I cannot stress that enough. You do not want to be on eGrants at 4:59 Eastern Time on Friday, December 6th. Get that application in early. Okay, we're going to show one more video, which, I mentioned this earlier. We showed one video that emphasized or that highlighted senior corps programs in New York City. Now let's take another perspective and look at senior corps programs, including, of course, the foster grandparent and senior companion programs in Montana. And then questions.
Street in Missoula, Montana, and we are currently building our 46th home in Missoula County. We are building for the Middlestat family, and what's priceless about the RSVP volunteers is by using their labor on our build site and even in our office, we're able to keep the cost of the home affordable for these families. They truly are priceless because they're allowing these families to purchase a home and keep it affordable for them.
Come on and show me my new house. Here's one of the kids' bedrooms. Here's their other kid's bedroom. And then this is our room. I'm glad to be a homeowner finally.
I have had a senior companion. We go grocery shopping to pick up my prescriptions, my doctor appointments.
I help, Missoula Aging helps the state. We're all working together to keep these people safe and in their homes if we can. The cost is so much smaller.
It saves the state a lot of money, saves me a lot of money, and it's just nice to be independent and live independently.
If I didn't have a senior companion, I would be really lost.
I've been a principal for 20 years, and I've worked with foster grandparents all of those years. The foster grandparents are really key in our testing program. You definitely see advances in academic areas because children benefit from that one-on-one attention they get.
We do have a 20-to-1 ratio, and so having another person in the room and other adults just make it a lot easier for us to help teach these kids.
Oh, the progression, you can't believe it. I had one little girl that wouldn't even say anything at Head Start. When I got to the end of the year, she was talking. She was using please and thank you.
I volunteer 4 hours a day. I could leave for lunch, but those kids all want to eat lunch with me every day.
Well, one of the things that I really like about volunteering with RSVP is that not only are we giving back to the community, but we're also saving money for the library where we work mending books. Because if we weren't there to mend books, they would just be thrown away. We were trained by a staff member there, and then she was able to go back to her regular job.
We serve on the average of about 250 meals a day to our clients. With my background as a physician for 40 years, my main function with Meals on Wheels is to do nutritional follow-ups on the clients to make sure that they are being adequately provided for.
As an RSVP volunteer, I've used skills that I've amassed over my professional career. People sit at computer terminals, and I help them, if they're not computer savvy, to navigate the different plans on Medicare.gov.
Its companionship is wonderful. It's you know, there's grace.
When I get back to the house after visiting with them, it's just like, oh, that was good.
As a volunteer, it puts some action in my life. I love the community, and I love the service that it does.
Okay, I like to end on that sort of uplifting note that shows you the real impact in the communities. Again, that video did include the one program, RSVP, that is not open for competition right now, but will be again next year. So if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, please do keep us in mind for those future opportunities. Let's go ahead and take some other questions here. Okay, I see some, all right, Mary asks, do current CNCS grantees have to create a new eGrants account? No, if your organization already has an eGrants account, that should be sufficient, but just make sure it's active, make sure your authorized representative knows how to sign in. We really do want to make sure that you don't run into any technical difficulties. Okay, I see Jamila emphasizing that we really do want to get applications in early, absolutely. If we have any other questions, now is a great time for those questions. We are coming down to the end of our webinar. You can see on the screen the 2020 FGP SCP at cns.gov email address again. Okay, I see a question from Jill. Would you please explain the $6,000 per VSY? So there are a couple of different ways that you can think about that $6,000 per VSY. The first thing I'm going to do is go back to our zoom in on the FGP Appendix A. Let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so the first way that you can understand the $6,000 per VSY is just that it's how we determined the minimum VSYs for each opportunity, right? So 13, $78,000 divided by 6,000 equals 13. 385, almost $386,000 divided by 6,000 equals 64, and so on down the line. So that's one way you can just think of it. It's the minimum amount of volunteer activity that you can have for the amount of funding available, measured in hours. That's all that 6,000 is. Now, if you've already looked into the Notice of Funding Opportunity, you'll see that that $6,000 number comes up in a second way too, which is measuring performance. We're going to go more into that in our later two webinars for the two specific programs. But as you'll see, you need to measure the performance of this number of VSYs in a particular way. And then any service you have above that, let's say for this California opportunity, you propose 14 or 15 volunteer service years worth of service, you don't need to subject that additional service to the same kinds of performance measurement systems. So that's how you'll see that $6,000. It comes up in two different ways. Here we've talked about it mostly in terms of just how we volunteer service years, but it also comes up when we think about performance measurement in our later webinars too. I want to fast forward again so we get that question up on the screen. Let's see. Andrea asked, if you're interested in pairing with foster youth, do you have to choose the outcomes for education, etc.? So Andrea, the best way to answer that question is you do need to use the outcomes that you see in our National Performance Measure instruction. So each program has a set of performance measures in them, including, it looks like this is a foster grandparent type program. It does say that there is a focus area for education, but I think if you look at that focus area, you'll see that there's actually a diversity of different measures you can choose within that depending depending on what you're trying to do. So you do need to follow those instructions and choose from that menu, but hopefully you'll find enough of a range there to suit your program. Sonda asks, is this competition just for the April 1, 2020 grant period, or does this include those that have a July 1st start date? I don't actually know that offhand. Courtney, do you know offhand if we've got any July 1 opportunities in either of our Appendix A's?
So for all of the programs that are listed on Appendix A, there should currently not be a program that is serving in those areas, and so we are hoping to be able to start those programs on April 1st. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything will start April 1st, but right now the projected start date for those programs, for those areas listed on Appendix A, is April 1.
Got it. Okay, thank you. So Jay says, is application review and criteria the same? Jay, I'm actually not entirely sure I understand your question. Feel free to jump in and clarify. So the evaluation criteria are what we use to review applications. I'm not sure if that's what you're getting at, right? So that's what we use to review applications, the evaluation criteria that you see in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Okay, Jill asks, does the entire $6,000 have to go to stipends, or can that be used for staff too? And this is, so the amount that you need to spend on stipends is actually just going to be $265 times the number of hours. So let's go back to that example. It's tricky how all this money stuff fits together. So can somebody multiply 13,572 times 265 for me? Can anybody in the audience there multiply 13,572 times 265? Let's see if anybody's got that in the chat. Okay, it looks like, who's this? It looks like Carmela is the quickest, right? It's about $36,000. So that would be the amount that opportunity has going to stipends. The rest of the funding is used from the rest of the program. Also note that is a minimum number of volunteer service years and a maximum amount of funding. So if you have more volunteer service years, particularly stipended ones, that number might be higher. But the number that you see there, that $6,000 number, that is not the amount of expenditures on stipends. It's a ratio, right? It's how we determine the right number of stipends to the for the size of the federal grant. Okay, Jay is saying that the site says review criteria, not evaluation criteria. Apologies if I'm mixing words there. Let's actually, the easiest way to solve this is we're just going to go to the site, and I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. While I do that, let me see. Somebody's letting me know that I may have missed a question from Dawn. So if someone volunteers and makes more than 2,000% threshold, their hours would not count as VSY. Right, so the VSY is a measure of stipended activity. It's a measure of stipended activity. But let's go to the website right now. Hang on one second. Okay, I'm going to get here the way I typically get here, which is just using our good old search engine. So I'm here now on our competition website, and you can see lots of resources here. In particular, the resource that we want to use is the Notice of Funding Opportunity. You can see there's one for each program. We were using the FGP Appendix A, so let's go ahead and use the SCP Notice of Funding Opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and open and scroll down to what we are thinking about. Here we go. Okay, right, so it does, thank you, Jay, it does say review criteria. And then you see these criteria here. So apologies for using the wrong word there, but this is certainly what I was talking about, right? The criteria that we use to review the application. Hopefully that's self-explanatory. The criteria looks like the criteria you might be accustomed to seeing. As we come down to our final couple of minutes here, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a couple of polls just so you can let us know how we did. Two very simple, very short polls. Helps us keep improving, make sure that we are getting you the information that you need. We do appreciate your feedback. We do still have a couple of minutes here. Courtney, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I don't have any.
Okay, thank you. Well, if there are no other questions coming in, I do just want to thank everybody for your time and for your interest. And again, stress how excited we are to be able to offer this opportunity. We really hope that you will take advantage of it. We are excited to see some applications in here. I'm excited to know that there are many people who already invest in the Senior Corps community, interested in expanding or building on their work. And I'm also very excited to see that there are some folks coming in from outside the community who are interested in contributing to this really, really vibrant set of programs all across the country. If there are no more questions, we will go ahead and sign off. Again, the session has been recorded. The recording will be up on the competition website. And we've got more training to come throughout the week and lots more resources on that competition website for all of you. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great afternoon and good luck.